Jason Fung, nephrologist and best-selling author, shares his experiences utilizing an individualized approach to fasting to successfully treat thousands of overweight, metabolically ill, and diabetic patients, and why being a doctor who specializes in kidney disease gives him a unique insight into early indications of metabolic disease. Let's listen to Dr. Jason Fung.
Sometimes some people say, well, we don't know what causes cancer. That's sort of a cop-out because we actually do know a lot about what causes cancer. And these are things that cause cancer are called carcinogens. And the World Health Organization maintains a huge list of these carcinogens. But if you want to break it down into what causes cancer in most people, you can look at the sort of, a couple of studies have looked at the sort of percentage contribution of these carcinogens to cancer. And the biggest one, of course, is tobacco smoke. So that's sort of by far and away the biggest contributor to cancer at around 35%. And these estimates were from 2015. So it was higher before when more people are smoking, but as a contributor to a cancer, it's the biggest. Interestingly, the second biggest and almost as big is actually our diet. So it's a huge, huge part of what contributes to cancer in general and far outstrips. So those two are way above any other causes of cancer. So when you worry about things such as radiation or, chemicals, sunscreens and pesticides and stuff like that, they do cause cancer, but the contribution in a whole population is very small. So what's interesting about diet is that we know this from our studies, but what part of the diet actually contributes to cancer? And that's where things sort of bog down a lot. So initially in the 70s, people talked about fiber. So people thought about, oh, hey, well, maybe if you eat a lot of fiber, what you're going to do is have a lot of big bowel movements, and that's going to clean out your bowel and you're not going to get cancer. Turns out that wasn't true. Then the next thought was, hey, maybe it's dietary fat. So if you remember the 80s and 90s, there's this huge movement against fat that, all fat is bad for you. It caused heart disease and all this sort of stuff, much of which has sort of been, overturned at this point. But there's this thought, maybe it causes cancer too. Turns out that wasn't true either. Then people talked about vitamins. So maybe cancer is like a vitamin deficiency. So we did many, many studies, millions of dollars, decades of research, where we would randomize people to, say, one group that took a certain vitamin and one group that didn't, and see if there's any difference in cancer. So we tested vitamin A, didn't work. Vitamin B didn't work. Folic acid didn't work. Vitamin C didn't work. Vitamin D didn't work. Vitamin E didn't work. Selenium didn't work. Omega-3 fatty acids didn't work. So all of those supplements didn't actually make any difference to the incidence of cancer. So we were sort of stuck at that point in the mid-2000s saying, oh, it's the diet, but what part of the diet? And that's when it became sort of more and more clear that this cancer is actually an obesity-related disease. So what happened, of course, is that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, people didn't really think about it, but then we had this obesity epidemic, so it became a bigger and bigger problem. So obesity in 2003, when they started to look at the studies, that was the first really definitive studies that said, hey, obesity is actually a huge risk factor, as well as type 2 diabetes. And both of those conditions will actually increase your risk of certain types of cancer a lot. So it really depends on what type of cancer you're talking. Like if you're talking lung cancer, obesity plays almost no role in it, right? That's smoking. Or if you have asbestos, which causes mesothelioma, which is a cancer of the lining of the lung, again, obesity plays no role. But things like breast cancer and colorectal cancer, which are sort of really important cancers, they actually are obesity-related cancers. So that was the sort of big link. And to this, at this point, the World Health Organization considers 13 different types of cancer as obesity-related cancers, which is huge because from 2003, we didn't even know. Like when I went to medical school, nobody thought obesity caused cancer.
Really?
It's almost as big as smoking. It's a huge, huge thing. So therefore, if you know that, that's super powerful, because if you can maintain a normal weight, you're going to reduce, just like stopping smoking, right? You're going to reduce your risk of these types of cancer. Certain things, so smoking and diet are probably your biggest factors. And then there's like 100 different other risk factors for cancer. These are the other carcinogens that we talk about. But also things such as, background radiation and sun exposure, like if you get too much sun, for example. So there's all sorts of other things, and genetics plays a role. But one of the big mistakes I think we made is that we focus so much on the genetics part of it, thinking that, well, this is sort of a random mutation that causes cancer, not sort of, which puts the onus on sort of this random luck idea that it's just bad luck. So the point about cancer is that cancer is like a seed. So if you have the genetics, you have the propensity to develop cancer. And this seed of cancer actually exists in all of our cells, and actually not just all our cells, but in all multicellular animals have that sort of seed of cancer. So what's important then is you can't do anything about the seed, but what you can do something about is the soil, which is that if you provide a fertile sort of soil for that seed to germinate, then you are going to increase your risk of developing this cancer. And cancer is not a rare disease. I mean, it affects like 1 in 10 of us, 1 in 8 of us, something like that. So it's something that we really have to think about as we live longer, because it is one of these really important things. Cancer is a very complex disease, and the way we think about cancer, we just don't know what it is. So for such a common disease, it's a total mystery why we get this cancer. Because if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense for cancer to develop, because it's actually part of us. That is, if you develop breast cancer or colon cancer, for example, that cancer cell was initially derived from our own natural cells. So why would it want to do this? That is, if you get cancer, then the cancer grows and then it kills you, and it kills itself
it kills, yeah.
So why would this sort of thing ever develop? It doesn't make any sense from a sort of that looking at it that way. The thing is that if you, like, once you have the cancer, it's really hard, because that's sort of like, if you don't change the oil in your car, then your car breaks down. Then you say, oh, I'm going to start changing the oil in my car. Well, yeah, that's good, but you need a lot more than that. It's the same thing. Once you actually develop the cancer, then it's really hard to fix from a diet standpoint. You really need the drugs that we've spent, millions and billions of dollars developing over these last 30 years. But in terms of preventing cancer, there's actually no reason why you couldn't, because you can look at sort of people who live in a traditional society, for example. So you can take a look at, say, the Inuit or the American Indians sort of before sort of they became westernized. Or you can look at the African people before they're sort of assimilated into a Western culture. And interestingly, those peoples were actually considered, some of them were considered immune to cancer. There was so little cancer that they thought that the Inuit, for example, or what used to be called the Eskimos, actually could not get cancer. So the university, Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, they used to send an expedition up to the Arctic Circle every year to study why these Inuit couldn't get cancer. Of course, as they became westernized and started eating, sugar and white flour, then they started getting all the same cancers that we did. In Africa, for example, this fellow by the name of Denis Burkitt, who is a sort of a missionary and doctor, when he got down there, he's like, wow, he was like, look at the difference. The people who live traditionally in Africa get no cancer, no colon cancer. But the minute they transition to a Western style civilization with their foods, with the whole thing, they actually start to get cancer. You don't find cancer when that. So it was called actually a disease of civilization. So all of these diseases, obesity, diabetes, and cancer, were not found in people living traditionally. So the point is, not that, one is that they didn't live as long, but the point is that if you can find and understand what makes it, protective from them, why the soil, like we all have the seed, but the soil was different. What it is about that if we can understand that, then you can reduce your risk substantially to the point where your risk is very low. Again, as an example, if you take a Japanese or Chinese woman from Japan or from Shanghai and you move them to San Francisco, within a couple of generations, the risk of breast cancer approximately triples.
Crazy.
So it's crazy, exactly. But that's great hope, because
if you know the root of it, then you can go back to a different way of living.
Exactly. Because if you can, and remember, Shanghai and Japan and so on, they're modern societies. So if you can understand what it is about the diet, about the lifestyle that's so important, you could actually take that woman in San Francisco and reduce her risk of breast cancer by a third. So that's very, very powerful knowledge. Yeah, I think that's a good question. And it's sort of, sugar is probably one of the very, very important things that we really need to lower, because that really supports it. And it gets to how cancer develops. A lot of the refined foods, and people talk, and the most that we eat, like the one thing we eat more than anything else, tends to be refined carbohydrates. So, white bread and that kind of thing. That's probably the most important thing, is the sugar and refined grains. Refined anything is probably bad for you. So, even if you're not talking about carbohydrates, but refined, say, oils, you should eat natural oils. Like eat foods that are sort of in the natural state, and refined meats, like eating bologna, for example. People talk about meat all the time, but it's like there's a big difference between bologna and grass finished beef sort of thing. There's a huge difference, because one is jam packed full of chemicals and other crap, and one is just beef, right? And people have been eating beef for thousands of years. So those refined foods, so refined carb, but also refined fats and refined proteins, probably those play a decent role, although the evidence is lower. And then the other thing that is really important, the fifth thing that's probably very important, is likely the frequency that we eat. That is, eating all the time provides that sort of fertile soil. So to understand why this is, you have to get back to sort of how cancer develops. So you have to understand that cancer almost evolves almost as a separate species from us. So when you have a breast cancer cell, for example, it originated from a normal breast cell, but after it evolves, it grows or it doesn't grow depending on growth factors. And it's almost a separate species from us. That is, it will grow and it won't. The normal breast cell or a normal lung cell, they will do everything to, play on the team, right? So they're always supporting the body. You're a team player. Those cancer cells are not team players. Basically, they're out for themselves. This cancer cell now is only interested in its own survival. That is, it will grow, and it will grow at the expense of its neighbors. So it will keep growing, and it will destroy everything around it. So it will move around, for example. So a breast cancer cell will move around the body. And that's not for the good of the whole body, right? It's for the good of itself. It's trying to spread itself around. So it is a foreign invader almost that has evolved from us. But during the development of this cancer, it will grow or not grow depending on growth signals. So our body has certain nutrient sensors. So nutrient sensors tells our body when food is available. So when you eat, certain hormones like insulin and mTOR will go up. And that tells our body that food is available, we should grow, right? Because you don't want your cells to grow when there's no food, right? It's just natural. Mm-hmm. If there's no food, you got to get rid of some of those extraneous cells. So if you're eating all the time and you're always activating these nutrient sensors, you're actually telling your body, grow, 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 grow. So if you eat 6-8 times a day, you're telling your body, your cells in your body, grow, 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 grow. If you eat fewer times, like 3 times a day, or you do intermittent fasting, if you don't eat at all, what you're going to do is shut down those growth signals, and this cancer will have a more difficult time to grow. So if you grow breast cancer cells in the lab, for example, you can't do it without insulin. It will actually wither up and die. If you don't eat, like fasting, for example, one is you're going to lower your insulin levels, which will, lower the overall growth signaling in our body, which is a good thing for adults. And adults' growth is not good. Generally, you stay the same size. You don't want to be growing too much, because the growth, a high growth environment, of course, lets the cancer sort of grow out of control. And that was the secret to why vitamins, for example, was not a good thing, because it's basically growth. It supports growth of cells. And what they found in a lot of studies was when they gave people these vitamin supplements, they actually got more cancer. They didn't get less cancer, they got more cancer. So in fact, it's just like if you spread fertilizer on an empty field. You want the grass to grow, but what grows are a bunch of weeds, because you've put down all this growth signaling stuff. So therefore, all you get is the weeds. When you give high doses in these studies, you do get certain ones, so folic acid, for example, and beta carotene, which is a precursor to vitamin A. And those two studies, there is actually a suggestion that you actually get more cancer from them. Because in our current situation in North America, most of us are not vitamin deficient. Most of us actually have too much. You actually want to slow down the growth.
Really?
And this is why obesity and type 2 diabetes are so intimately linked with cancer, is because both conditions are conditions where we have too much insulin in our body. There's several ways to do that. One is to change either the foods that you eat, and that is the sugar, for example, the refined carbohydrates that make up the bulk of our diet. And the other thing is to change the frequency with which you eat, because you can affect both things. So just like if you're, for example, to pay, $10 and you pay it every day, it adds up quickly, right? If you have a coffee every day and it's like, $5 or $7 at Starbucks, every day, it adds up. So just like that, it's not just the amount that you're paying, which is not much, but it's the frequency, right? Same thing with the foods. It's not just the amount that you eat or what it is that you eat, it's how often you eat it. So if you're eating now 6-8 times a day, well, that's a lot worse if you ate once a day, right? That's just basic math. Like, you can't get around that. And the problem is, of course, that if you look at how people eat today compared to sort of 1970, it's very different. So in 1970, people ate 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. No snacks. Nobody ate snacks back then. Nowadays, of course, when you look at the studies, people are eating 5-6 times a day. You even look at schools. It's like, they're going to have breakfast, then they're going to have a mid-morning snack, then they're going to have lunch, then they're going to have an after-school snack, then they're going to eat dinner, and then if they play soccer, in between the halves of soccer, parents think that you need to feed them like cookies. It's like, okay, well, I played soccer growing up and nobody chased me around with a bunch of cookies. We had a great time, right?
Exactly.
We didn't need it, right? But that's 6 times a day, every single day, and it's ingrained into us. A few years ago when my son was, going on a trip or something, the school said, well, you should pack him 2 snacks. I'm like, why? Why would you want to give him a bunch of snacks? Like, they're not good for you. Yeah, and this is the big thing that I've had, and, I talk about this in the obesity code, is because our body really exists in sort of one of 2 states. You're either in the fed state or you're in the fasted state. Okay, so when you're in the fed state, you're eating, insulin is going up, and as insulin goes up, its normal job is to tell your body to store those calories. Okay, so you can store it as glycogen, which is sugar, or it can store it as body fat. But that's the point. So you eat lunch or dinner, there's way more calories in that meal than you can use right at that point. So you want to store that. So when you don't eat, which is any time you don't eat, is called fasting. So when you fast, that means your insulin is going to drop, and that's the signal for your body to now start pulling those calories out of storage, right? And that's the reason you don't die in your sleep every single night, is because we have the ability to hold some of those calories in storage. So in the fed state, insulin goes up, you're storing calories or body fat. In the fasted state, you're not eating, your insulin's dropping, and you're using calories. So you're one or the other. You can't do both at the same time. So the only way that you can actually use the body fat is to let the insulin fall and not eat. So if you are now eating constantly, so the minute you get up, somebody tells you, oh, you have to eat, you can't skip breakfast, blah, 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 and then you have to snack all day long. So now if you look at studies, the average duration of how long people eat for is about 14 hours and 45 minutes. That's the average. So if you start eating at 8 a.m., you don't stop till 10:45 p.m. That's on average. That's the average. It takes about 4 hours for you to switch over into the fasted state. So the point is that before, where you'd eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, and by 6 o'clock you're done, boom, now you shift into using those calories, and your mom would say, oh, you need time to digest, right? That's what she sort of said. But the point was that you need to start using those calories that you stored up during your meal times. And that was the secret, that they could stay relatively slim. Now, if you're eating constantly, then you never give your body a chance to switch over into that fasted state and start using those calories. And the problem, of course, is that insulin stays high, which tends to keep your body storing calories. Your body, so the high insulin, for example, blocks fat burning. You can't burn your fat stores because your body's like, the instructions that I'm getting is to store energy, not use energy. I want to keep my stored energy for when there's a time that there's no food. The problem, of course, is that there's never a time there's no food, right? Every day is the same thing, right? 14 hours of eating and no time of not eating. And that's the point. So now if you understand the problem, you can say, well, how am I going to change this? Well, it's simple. Increase the amount of time that you're not eating. And that's all intermittent fasting is. If you eat one meal a day, for example, or if you eat within a 8-hour window or a 4-hour window or whatever, what you're doing is you're simply allowing your body to use the calories that have been stored, which is body fat predominantly. But that is precisely the reason you carry body fat. Like, that body fat is not there for looks. Is there for you to use, right? And that's the whole point. What's so bad about using it? If you don't eat, you're going to burn it. Well, so again, go back to the 70s, and everybody says, oh, you can't fast, you can't fast. Well, they're eating breakfast, lunch, dinner. And if you're a naughty boy, you got sent to bed without dinner. So now you went from 12 o'clock to 8 a.m., 20 hours, and nobody died. Nothing bad happens, right? There was nothing wrong with that. And hopefully you learned your lesson too, right? And that's the whole point, is that there's nothing wrong. It's a natural part of our human physiology. If we couldn't survive without eating, like, we would not be here today, because when we were cavemen and cavewomen, there might be a stretch of 3, 4, 5 days where there was no food, and therefore they had to survive on their own body fat, which they did. And that was the whole point. So let's let our body, use it, because that's the most natural thing to do. Yeah, I usually do a lot of I rarely eat breakfast. And I'll tell you that it didn't come, I started this in medical school. And that was mostly because I really wanted to just roll out of bed and go, I'd wake up literally 5 minutes before I left the door. I'd brush my teeth, put on some clothes, and rolled out the door. I was, it's just that the way I was, right? And so I don't eat breakfast now, because, again, people say you have to eat breakfast, but there's actually nothing magical about breakfast. If you don't eat breakfast, what's going to happen? Well, my body, which is now burning fat because I've had 8 hours of sleep, it's gone into sort of fat burning mode, because that's the storage form of calories, or it's burning sugar. It's just going to keep doing it, right? There's nothing wrong with it. So a lot of times I try and confine myself to sort of an eating window of sort of 6 to 8 hours. And then once in a while, when I get very busy, I will do a 24-hour fast, which is a 1 meal a day. And then every so often, I'll do a longer fast. And the longer fasts are actually not as bad as you might think, but they really disrupt your schedule sort of socially. It's a tough one, because a lot of our socialization happens at meals. So I often have dinner with my family, for example, and doing those longer fasts is really, really disruptive to that sort of thing, which is why when you look at traditional societies, like if you look at, say, during major religions, for example, there would be a period of fasting that's sort of universal. So,
everyone's doing it, so no one's feeling
exactly, because
stressed when they smell the food and they're like,
Exactly. So if it's like Good Friday, or during Lent, or during Ramadan for Muslims, or during Yom Kippur for Jews, or whatever, everybody's fasting. So it's actually terrifically easy because you're not disrupting the sort of social fabric of your life there. Whereas nowadays, if you fast, and I've done this, it's just really hard to do. It's not physically, it's not hard, but it's hard. And I do it mostly, when I've gained a bit of weight, usually after the holidays and after a vacation, I will sort of schedule a longer fast right after, because I know that I can lose that weight very quickly. But that means I can enjoy myself. Like a couple of years ago, I went on a cruise and really ate too much. Just a lot. I had a lot, and I knew it, and I could feel it in my pants were tight and stuff. So I did sort of a 3 or 4 day fast, and I'll tell you, by the next week, I was back to my normal weight. Well, that's great, because a week, but I got to enjoy the whole week prior, where I really didn't look at what I was eating or how often I was eating or anything. I was like, this is my vacation. I'm doing this. But at the same time, I know, hey, I've got this next, after this week, the week after, very little to eat. And it gives you a great tool to use if you need it, right? So if you think about fasting, you could go 3 days, you could go 5 days, you could go 30 days. People do that all the time. But
no food.
No food, yeah. So if you think about fasting, so the amount of energy that you need. So a pound of fat has 3,500 calories roughly. If you need about 1,800 calories, so that's for like a regular person, not like an athlete or somebody who's working out a lot. It takes about half a pound of fat per day. So if you're dealing with a lot of obese people, like 100 pounds overweight, you could go 200 days. If you want to lose 100 pounds, you could go 200 days without eating before you get into
survive.
trouble. And survive, exactly.
And be okay.
Exactly. Be perfectly fine, because this is a very efficient, fat is an efficient store of calories, right? It's very efficient. That's why we developed it.
It's to keep you alive when there's no food around.
Exactly. So use it.
Does it affect your digestive system? Does it mess with your metabolism if you don't eat after a certain amount of time?
Yeah.
And what happens when you start eating again? Does that affect your stomach, your intestines, your colon, your metabolism?
Yeah.
What's affected there?
And this is the interesting part, is that everybody thinks that fasting is like the worst thing you could do. When you actually look at the science of what happens during fasting, it's actually one of the best things you can do for yourself from both a mental standpoint and a physiologic standpoint. Assuming, of course, you're not malnourished, right? I mean, I'm assuming if you're the average American who's, 10, 20, 30 pounds overweight, then this is something that actually has a lot of benefits. So there's a lot of sort of myths around it. One is that you're going to burn a lot of muscle. And the truth is that you don't. I mean, when if your body stores energy as body fat. So people say, oh, you're going to burn muscle. It's like, well, you've got to think that our body is so stupid that it stores energy as fat, but the minute you need it, it starts burning muscle, right? Like, why would our body be so stupid? And if it were so stupid, how did we survive, right? And it's like, if you save firewood all winter for the winter, and then as soon as it gets cold, you chop up your sofa and throw it into the fire. It's like, why would you be so stupid, right? Our body's just the same. It's not that. So, and I know, and everybody knows that the way that you build muscle is that you exercise, right? So if you have, lift heavy weights, then your muscles become stronger. It doesn't become stronger because you eat, right? That does nothing for building muscle. Like, otherwise we'd be, the strongest nation on earth, right? But we're not. We're the fattest nation on earth. So that's the whole problem, right? I mean, you're confusing two completely different things. There is a point during fasting where there is a little bit of protein breakdown, and that's where people get very confused and say, well, you're burning muscle. But you're not. Protein is not the same as muscle. So our body has all kinds of protein, including all the connective tissue, like the skin and stuff that holds stuff in place. And some of that is often burned off. So, for example, when you look at those shows where people get surgery and they lose 150 pounds, they get all this flappy skin. That's not excess fat. That's excess protein. So that's, it's functional tissue that you've never used up. So we actually see very little of that problem when people fast, because there's a small period of time where they're actually using up the protein. Your body will maintain its musculature based on what exercise and stuff you're using. So another big myth, so muscle burning is one thing. The other big myth is people talk about, is starvation mode or metabolic rate. So metabolic rate is the amount of energy that your body uses in a day, the number of calories you burn in a day. And this is what we see if you simply cut calories. So this is a standard medical advice. Cut 500 calories a day and you'll lose a pound of fat a week. What happens, of course, is that you cut 500 calories a day, and then your body quickly reduces the amount of calories it uses by about 500 calories. So now you're actually not losing any weight. That's what happens all the time. Because
why does it stop burning those calories?
Well, it stops burning the calories by reducing its metabolic rate. So the metabolic rate is the energy that your body uses to, say, generate body heat, your liver, your kidney, your heart, and so on. We've known this for 100 years, that if you simply restrict the number of calories but keep the foods very similar, what happens is that your body is going to start using less. So because it doesn't like running a deficit, right? It's just like if you normally make $100,000 a year and you spend $100,000 a year, now you make $50,000. You don't keep spending 100, right? You're gonna get thrown into jail. But so you reduce your expenditure, same as a body. So it's getting less, so it's going to use less, and that's the natural reaction. It's important because it's a survival response. It cannot do anything different. So
it's almost like you need to be extreme in your use in order for it to burn and kill off these cells that might be harmful to you. But if you just do a little bit, I'm going to eat a little bit less today, it's not going to do that much.
It doesn't work. And people assume that if you go to zero, which is fasting, say you fast for a full day, you have 0 calories, you don't die, right? Because what happens is completely different. Now you've lowered your insulin, so you're changing the hormonal profile of the body. And as you do that, you're now switching fuel sources. So instead of using food as your fuel, you're switching it into body fat. Just like those hybrid cars where you go from gas to electric, right? So it's using food, and then boom, it goes, okay, I have no food coming in. I need to switch over now into body fat. And then it goes, whoa, I have like 500,000 calories of body fat here. So why do I need to cut it down? And the point is that it doesn't, because assuming if you have no body fat, of course, it's a problem. But for people who have adequate stores of body fat, which is most of us, and truthfully, most people do it for weight loss, too much body fat, then what happens is that there's so much there, why wouldn't you use it? Because it's a fuel source. That's all it is. That's the way you have to look at the body fat. If you're eating all the time, you can never use your body fat, because your insulin's here, your insulin's high, you're using food. Then you get hungry, so you eat some more, right? You have a snack, you have a low-fat muffin. You stay here. You can only burn food. All that stuff over there, those 500,000 calories of body fat, are completely inaccessible for your body. So if you simply dial it down like this and say, okay, instead of 2,000 calories, I'm going to eat 1,500, but I'm going to eat 10 times a day, keeping myself here. Now you only have 1,500 coming in. You can only burn 1,500. You can't access that. If you go to zero, you go boom, and then your body burns the full 2,000. So they did a study, for example, where they took people and fasted them for 4 days and measured how many calories they're using. They also measured their VO2, which, as you know, is something that it's a measure of how much cellular work your body is doing. And what they found, so they measured the metabolic rate at time 0, then they measured it at 4 days of zero food. And they were burning 10% more calories than they were per day than they were when they were eating. The VO2 was 10% higher. You're doing more work. Your body is actually not shutting down. It's revving itself up. And again, there's a good physiologic reason for that. And we know that when insulin goes down, when you switch yourself into this sort of, mode that you're burning fat, other hormones go up, including your sympathetic nervous system, which is your noradrenaline. So you're actually pumping your body up. The reason for that is sort of, again, it's a survival response. So imagine, again, we're cavemen and it's winter and there's no food. So if you don't eat for 2 days and you get weaker, you're never going to eat again. You're going to die, because every day is going to be harder. You're going to circle the drain. So our body's just not that stupid, right? So what they do is that your body says, okay, there's no food coming in. Boom, I'm going to switch you over to body fat, and then I'm going to pump you up so that you have energy. You go out there, you go kill that woolly mammoth.
You're focused, you're clear, you're in the zone, everything.
Exactly. And that's the reason that we actually pump ourselves up. And the mental aspects is actually fascinating, because people also say, well, I have to eat because I have to concentrate. It's like your concentration is actually much higher when you don't eat. Think about when you had a huge Thanksgiving meal. Well, were you really sharp, or did you really want to just lie down on the sofa and watch some football? Right? You don't have any sort of focus. But if you think about animals, it's the same thing. Lions, they just eat, they just like lounging around. But if you're the hungry wolf, that is a very dangerous animal, because he's focused, he's ready to kill you. Same thing for us. Our level of concentration and our mental ability, mental agility goes up significantly when we're hungry. Like if you think, oh, you're hungry for this, hungry for that, that doesn't mean you're falling down lethargic. It means you're focused. So it's interesting, because there was this book a few years ago called Unbroken, which is a biography of this fellow who went to a prisoner of war camp in World War II Japan. And he was talking about starvation, and they were literally starving. Like they'd eat like almost nothing for the full day. And he's talking about how his other prisoners were doing these incredible mental feats. So one guy was reading a book entirely from memory. Another guy learned all of Norwegian in a week. And so the guy says, this is simply the mental clarity of starvation. So it was incredible. It's like, it was so widespread. Everybody was starving, and they'd see these incredible feats that nobody else in the world could do all the time, because your mental ability is ramped up to such a high degree. And then, in the ancient Greece, the ancient mathematician Pythagoras, he would require his students to fast in order to come to his class, because otherwise he thought they had no mental agility to learn this stuff. And it's like, wow, this is incredible, completely different than what we were taught. But again, same thing, our body's actually ramping up, because again, our major advantage over the lions and tigers and bears is really that mental ability.
But isn't there like a period of time in the day for most people where they feel, man, I'm really hungry. Like I can't focus, I can't concentrate because I'm starving. Like I want food now, and it's actually hurting them and focusing. It's almost like a window of time where you have to just deal with that period, and then it switches on into, okay, I'm not hungry anymore. I haven't eaten in a day, but I'm not hungry anymore, and I'm focused. Isn't there this kind of window of time?
There absolutely is. So this is why it's important to get, to understand what happens during fasting, so you can prepare for it. So if you look at hunger during fasting, so they've done, again, studies where they fast people for 24 hours and they measure a hormone called ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone. The higher it is, the hungrier you are. Turns out that our ghrelin peaks 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So you get hungry at 12 o'clock. It's lunchtime, you get hungry. So it's a learned response. The question is, what happens if you don't eat? Does hunger keep going up and up and up? It doesn't. In fact, the ghrelin actually peaks, and then it just falls. If you don't eat, it will actually just fall down, and it will fall down within a couple of hours right to baseline, which means that your level of hunger at 12:30, 1 o'clock, you're hungry. No question about it. If you don't eat by 3, 4 o'clock, that hunger level is actually the same whether you ate or you didn't eat. What happened? Well, your body simply took the calories it needed from your body fat. You took that meal from your body fat, and your hunger went down. So that's really interesting. So if you know that it's a wave, right, you just have to let the sort of wave pass over you. So I often tell people, you will get hungry. Okay, don't pretend that you're not, because you will. What you got to do is prepare for it and say, okay, well, if you get hungry, then there's several things. One, stay busy. Keep doing stuff. Don't just think about how hungry you are. So we all have had this where we're working on some kind of, doing work at work, or if you're doing some kind of, home renovation or something. I get this all the time where I'm like painting, the house or something like that, right? And I'll just power right through because I just want to get it done. And I'm not hungry at all because I'm so busy. I'm so focused on doing the work that I just forgot about it, right? You see this all the time, people who go to the casino and people who play video games, they just get so engrossed. So that's one strategy. The other strategy is to get something like green tea or coffee that you can drink. By the time you finish, a big cup of green tea, the hunger will have passed. But you know that it's going to pass, and that's the point. It's not going to get worse and worse and worse. And that's how you do it. What's even more interesting, actually, is if you look at multiple day studies where they fast people for 3, 4, 5 days, the ghrelin peaks, and then after about 2 days, it starts going down. So by day 2, day 3, as you get to day 4, day 5, the hunger almost completely disappears. Wow. It's actually fascinating if you've never done it. So I've done a few of these 4 or 5 day fasts, and it's interesting because there's actually no physical sense of hunger. There's a whole lot of, hey, that slice of pizza looks really good. I really want to eat it. Right. But there's no actual physical hunger. So if I hadn't seen it, which is hard now, of course, with all the advertising and all this sort of stuff, I would have actually, gone and right by and done it. But the point is that the hunger is something that you have to learn how to deal with. But it's not impossible because, again, one of the big objections to people with fasting is that nobody can do it. Like, it'll work. Sure, if you don't eat, you'll lose weight, but nobody will do it. Well, that literally millions of people throughout history have done this. Look at Ramadan, you look at Yom Kippur, you look at Lent. Like when people say, okay, we're going to fast together because our strength is in our togetherness, right? It's Good Friday. We're not going to eat for this amount of time. Well, that's how people did it, right? Yeah. They supported each other. There was no food around. Somebody's not frying up, his steak while you're trying to fast.
Baking cookies, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how you do it, right? You get yourself a supportive community. You figure out something that you really love to do that keeps you active during that time, and that's how you get through it, right? And while you do that, of course, your body uses up the body fats. You're going to lose weight. It's going to use up the blood sugar, which is going to keep you from becoming diabetic, and its insulin is going to fall, which is going to reduce your risk of cancer in the long term, as well as those other conditions, obesity and type 2 diabetes, which put you at such high risk of cancer in the first place. So you're doing all kinds of good stuff for your body, and it's completely free, right?
You don't have to spend any money on it, yeah.
Exactly. And this is the part that's crazy. It's because if you think about the number of diseases that you can make better, heart attacks, strokes, cancer, diabetes, which is the leading cause of blindness, of kidney disease, of amputations, the secret to managing all of these things is not more medicine and surgery. It's less. It's actually within our grasp because fasting is free to every single person on earth. You can do it literally right now and start right now on the path to getting better. It's just a matter of having that knowledge to do it. But people tell you, oh, you can't do it, you can't do it. It's like, that's not true. We all used to do it, right? If you think about, a community of on Yom Kippur, like millions of Jews around the world are doing it, or Ramadan, millions of Muslims are doing it, or, millions of Catholics are fasting during Good Friday. Like my priest used to tell me all the time during Lent, fasting, like that's all he talked about practically. So it's such an incredible tool that we've just sort of forgotten about, and yet has more power than almost anything else to prevent all of these diseases. And we don't have to charge anybody anything. We're not trying to sell anybody anything. We're just trying to tell you, yes, you can do it, because if you have too much weight and it's putting you at risk of this cancer, then let your body burn off that sugar. Let your body burn off that fat.
A couple months ago, I did a 4-day fast where I just had water and a black coffee a day. And it felt incredible. First couple of days was challenging, but by day 3, I was like, I'm in the zone. And I felt good. I looked younger. I felt healthier. I was doing it more of like seeing what I could do in my mindset and seeing what it would do for my, kind of cleaning out my system. I just so happened to lose 7.5 pounds. It was burning a lot of excess fat. But I just felt better. I felt more confident. I felt like, I could do something challenging, which gave me more strength in my mind. It was a spiritual experience in a lot of ways. Yeah. And I'm curious, what are the other myths about fasting that people are afraid of that you've debunked?
I mean, the point about being healthier is one of these things that people think it's super unhealthy for you. It's actually one of the healthiest things you can do, as long as you're, again, not underweight and you're doing it safely, right? You're not on a bunch of medications that need adjustment and that kind of thing. But there's this whole recent scientific sort of revolution into this process called autophagy, which has been, very, very topical. People have been going crazy on it because in 2016, one of the Nobel Prizes in medicine was awarded to one of the early researchers. And what it showed is that when you fast, and you turn down these nutrient sensors, then your body actually starts to activate a process called autophagy. And autophagy is where your body breaks down these sort of subcellular organelles and just gets rid of them, right? It breaks it down and recycles them. And everybody thinks, well, if you're breaking down stuff, that's bad for you, right? You're breaking down protein is bad for you. It's good for you because the first thing you need to do whenever you want to renovate, for example, say you want to renovate your bathroom, the first thing you got to do is throw out everything in there, right? That avocado green tub has to go. Otherwise, you can't put in a new tub, right? It's just the way it is. That's just, so your body works the same way. The first thing you have to do is get rid of the old junky old protein. You got to break it down.
You got to kill off those cells.
Yeah,
you got to destroy them, rip them off the body, and let them whatever
stuff you don't need,
or they flush out your skin or whatever they do, right?
Exactly. The skin proteins, the connective tissue, all of that goes. And it's not like the body knows what it needs and doesn't need. What happens is that everything starts to go, and then the stuff you need, like if you're still exercising, your body's like, hey, I still need those muscles. I'm going to rebuild that. So that's the key, that one of the things that activates during fasting is actually growth hormone. So if you fast for 24 hours, your growth hormone level is like 4 times what it is when you're eating. Yeah. And it sounds very strange. Why would growth hormone goes up? Well, it's because of this whole process where you want to break down stuff. As soon as you start to eat it, you want to rebuild all of it. So the Nobel Prize in Medicine, which is Dr. Osuni, said this is the body's intracellular recycling system. So it's not let's flush out all our old stuff. It's not flush it out and rebuild into new stuff. But if you think about it, that's incredibly powerful because that's the whole process of rejuvenation, right? Get rid of the old stuff, bring in new stuff. It's like renovating your body, right? So all the cells in your body undergo this process of regeneration that you're not going to get if you are eating all the time. So this is this whole, in people who are very interested in wellness, a lot of people are looking into this autophagy and so on. And you get this point where you're doing, so you've done these longer fasts. It's like, wow, you just feel really good about yourself. You're full of energy, right? And this is the thing that I thought very strange when I did my first sort of 3 or 4 day fast. It's like, I have a ton of energy. Like I could feel like I could do anything. My friend who used to work, he's a doctor, and he worked a lot of nights and stuff. He said it felt like my brain was like on fire. Like I thought I could do anything and everything faster than I could and better than I could ever do it before. Interestingly, another friend of mine who's a cardiologist, so he's a heart specialist, he says, he played piano for his whole life. And he says, there's always this piece that I couldn't play. And then as soon as I started fasting, I noticed that I could start to do it.
Wow.
Like, that's incredible, right? And the doctors, when I talk to the doctors, they actually instantly see the logic of what I'm talking about because they know the physiology, what happens in the human body. Because what I'm talking about, which is what all the stuff we know about medical physiology, is in contrast to all the stuff that people tell you about fasting, which is, you can't do it, and it's dangerous, and it's really bad for you. Whereas the opposite is true, right? It's actually part of a natural cycle, right? It's feeding and fasting, right? You don't feed all the time, you don't fast all the time. But we've gone so far into that one thing. So yeah, I mean, this whole point of autophagy is very, very interesting and very topical. If you look at studies of longevity, for example, in animals, the only thing that really makes animals in the lab live longer is caloric restriction. And so even almost 100 years ago, people were talking about it and saying, well, you can try and restrict your calories, but if you do that day after day after day, it's really hard. So fasting may be a better way to go, which is something they figured out sort of ages ago, because if you look back, that's how people thought of fasting. That people called it a cleanse, a detoxification, reawakening, spiritual, purification, that kind of thing, right? There's this whole sense of rebirth and something super healthy for you, which got turned in the 80s into something really bad for you, right? It's strange how things work, but without any sort of scientific evidence, and as we become, as a nation, more overweight, it becomes even more important. And that's just one of these sort of fascinating things. So, it's not like something I just made up. It's like literally the oldest dietary intervention in the books, right? I'm just rediscovering this and trying to tell people, hey, there's a lot of good medical science that tells you this is actually something that is applicable to what we're seeing today in our healthcare. And you can do something, like you don't need your doctor, you don't need your dietitian. You can do something about it right now for no money. Right? And there's the science is all there, right? Imagine how much money you could save as a society if we got rid of this problem. And it's like, oh my God, like it's mind blowing.
Well, I think that's part of the issue is the reason it's not popular, I guess, is because businesses make a lot of money on medicine. Businesses make a lot of money on selling more food, not selling less food. Yeah. And therefore people want to make more money. And so they have to market their products. They have to market their medicines. They have to market their foods to try to sell more of it, not to say, oh, just have a few of these. Just have a couple of cookies a day. No, they want to sell boxes of cookies, right? It's not like they got to make money. As in their mind, this is a business to be run, and we need to sell more. It means more people need to eat sugar, refined sugar, breads, all these things, refined oils, refined meats, refined fats. All these things you said that are horrible for us to eat, the company's making them. In order for them to survive financially, they need to sell more of these things to us, which is a challenge.
It's a real problem, because if you look at, say, the doctors and the dietitians, you go to conferences, they're sponsored by Kellogg's and, the breakfast makers and so on. And it's crazy. I was watching the show the other day, one of these, TLC shows with like these very heavy women. Anyway, they're trying to lose weight and they're taking these protein shakes. I'm thinking, and they couldn't drink it. It was horrible stuff. It tasted really bad, so they spit it out. I'm thinking, somebody's just trying to make a buck on you, because you should just drink water, let your body use the fat and use the protein from your own body. Why would you want to drink 2 of these protein shakes a day? Except that somebody wants to sell it to you, right? You're being played here. You're drinking this horrible, horrible tasting stuff, and they're spitting it out. They couldn't take it. It's like, the whole thing is so sad, because it's like, if you knew, you could simply take nothing at all and be far healthier and save yourself a lot of money. It's a sad, sad sort of state of affairs that we get into.
What would you say are the top 4 or 5 benefits of fasting then? If we had to recap that part of it, what would you say are the top 5? I'm hearing it's free. That's one of them.
Yeah, so it's free. That's a huge thing. You can add it to any diet, because remember that it does not tell you what to eat when you're eating. It only tells you the period of time that you're not eating. So whether you're a vegetarian or carnivore or paleo or keto or whatever you want to be, even if you want to eat fast food all day, it doesn't tell you can't eat fast food. It tells you that during this period of time, don't eat. So you can add it to any diet, which is incredible, because now we're pulling on a completely different lever. That is, if you think about weight loss and nutrition in general, there's 2 levers, right? We always think of what you're eating, right? Eat more vegetables. That's great. But what if you don't like vegetables, right? Well, that lever doesn't work, right? So here's a completely different lever. You're talking about, well, there's this other thing I can do to lose weight or get healthier, right? So we can add it to any diet. It's completely flexible. That is to say, you can do it whenever you want, or if you don't want. So if it's Christmas and you do not want to fast for these few days, then you don't have to. If you decide to fast longer after Christmas, then sure, you can do that. That's completely up to you. It's not like you're locked in. The fourth thing is that it's very simple. So if you look at a lot of diets, that is to say you're on a paleo diet. It's a great diet, right? But it's like, this is paleo and this is paleo and this is not paleo, right? It's complex, or keto, or whatever you want to be. So it's very difficult for some people to understand, and I've tried to explain sort of these differences because they'll always get confused, and you always get is this keto or is this paleo or whatever. Whereas fasting is very simple. It's like you can drink water and tea and herbal tea, say. That's it. Everything else you can't eat, right? So it's very simple to explain to somebody. It makes it very easy for them to follow because it's very black and white. If you ate a peanut, that's not fasting, right? Yes, it's not a big deal, but at the same time, that's not fasting. And then the other thing is that it's powerful, right? Because if you follow any type of a diet, there's always a natural limit. So say you want to lose weight, and so you say, I'm going to do a keto diet or a paleo diet or a vegetarian diet. So you do a vegetarian diet and you lose a few pounds, but not as much as you want. Well, you can't go more vegetarian than vegetarian. You're already vegetarian, right? Exactly. So what else are you going to do? There's nowhere else or you can't go more keto or you can't go more paleo. Whereas there's no actual upper limit to what you can do in terms of fasting. And it's powerful because you're eating zero, which means that it is by definition for weight loss the most powerful diet there is. Like, absolutely, you cannot lose more than that.
If you put any calories in your body, no matter what diet you're on, you're not going to lose as much as if you had 0 calories.
Exactly. So that's the whole thing. It is the most powerful diet. It's the most powerful weapon you have. But it's like, okay, well, why would you not want it? Right? If you have a lot of work to do, you want the best tool. That's it, right? This is the best tool. And somehow we said, don't ever use this, right? It's like, why? If you use it, you'll actually get all these other benefits. So it's just free, it's available, it's simple, you can do it with any diet, and it's powerful. And you actually don't have to stop. You can actually keep going. You can, do a 7-day fast and take a little break, do another 7-day fast. And you can't go lower than 0. There's no way it is possible physiologically to go less than 0. So it is the most powerful diet. So there's so many benefits, and yet for years, I'll tell you, when I started using it with patients in about 7 years ago, maybe, it was like the stuff we saw was just incredible. People were like coming off their medications, they were reversing their type 2 diabetes, they were losing weight. It's like, all from this simple intervention that is literally the oldest one in the book.